I worked for Sun Classics for many years as an editor. Eventually did some second unit directing for Chuck Sellier, although that was actually after Sun Classics, but kind of started with him in that company. I thought I wanted to be a still photographer, so I went to photography school in Santa Barbara, Brooks Institute, which is no longer in business. I actually got involved with their film program and loved film much more than I did still photography. And then for a long time tried to get into the business. It was very difficult in those days. I was working for a commercial production company in Hollywood, and we would hire freelance editors to come in and cut a commercial for us. And I got friendly with one of the editors. And a year or so later, after that company had folded and I was kind of struggling trying to find something, a friend of mine, a woman friend of mine, told me about Sun Classics, and she said, you know, they're doing a lot of work up in Utah, you should send them a resume. So I sent a resume off, and a few days later I get this phone call, and it turned out there was this editor that I'd worked with a few times in the commercial company had become the post-production supervisor. So he said, you know, do you want to come to Utah and work for Sun Classics and cut TV movies? And they were doing Grizzly Adams at the time. And I said, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to do that. And he said, well, they had a liaison office in Hollywood because all production was done in Salt Lake. We had a liaison office in Hollywood that would handle dealing with the lab and cutting in opticals and things like that. So he said, I want you to run that office for a while, and once I get an opening here, I'll bring you up. And I did that, and I started cutting teasers for the different shows. You know, you'd go to a commercial, and then there'd be a little teaser, 10, 12-second teaser. One of the directors up there, Jim Conway, just liked the teasers so much. He said, we got to get this guy up here and have him cut shows. So it wasn't too long, I think 6 or 7 months I was in that office, and then I went to Salt Lake and sort of slowly started working my way in. You know, I never had to go through all of the assistant editor stuff, but I was an associate editor on a couple of Grizzly Adams shows, and then finally got a show of my own to cut, and I stayed there about 5 or 6 years. When I was working in the post-production liaison office, one of the first things that happened was I got a call one day. We used to do all our sound mixing over at Glen or CFI at the time. And I got a call one day saying, Chuck wants a foosball table at the mixing stage. So, you know, I have no idea how you get a foosball table. I ran around, finally we found one, and it got delivered to him, and I went over to make sure everything was okay, and I briefly met him, you know, on the stage, and was not very impressed. He was kind of an odd guy, you know, kind of I don't know, he was just kind of a strange character. And that's the first time I met him. And then I really wasn't on the stage much because there wasn't a lot for me to do on the sound stage. So I didn't really see him again until after I had been brought up to Salt Lake. And then of course you got to see him all the time because he was very much involved with every cut and all of post-production. So.
May 10th, 1975. Dan Wilson was about to enter a realm from which very few persons have ever returned. He was about to die. Though pronounced clinically dead, Wilson miraculously recovered and was able to tell about the experience.
The first full show that I did was The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Sun Classics had arranged to do a bunch of TV movies based on the classic illustrated comic books. Last of the Mohicans, Sleepy Hollow, I can't remember all of them, but I ended up doing Sleepy Hollow. It starred Jeff Goldblum, of all people, as Ichabod Crane. You can imagine that. So that was the first one, and then just one. We did a lot of work. You just one show after another. You just ground out shows all the time. Sun Classics at that time it was kind of a powerhouse, really. I mean, we were doing, oh my gosh, we were Grizzly Adams, we were doing movies of the week, probably a couple, 2 or 3 of those a year, maybe more. Plus he was doing independent features, documentaries, all kinds of things. It was really quite a large company. I mean, they had rolling stock, trucks, vehicles. We had a post-production office in downtown Salt Lake that was, a 3-story building with, I think we probably at one time had 7 or 8 editors and maybe 10 or 15 sound people, and it was a big organization. It was a lot of money being made, not by any of us, of course, but for the time it was quite a big deal, and I really kind of liked it. It was it was an interesting thing for me because I'd been trying so hard to get into the business and work at all, and then all of a sudden I was put in this situation where it just kept coming. I'd do a show, there'd be another show. I'd maybe take a week off, and then there'd be another show right on top of it. We would do a show, and then I would cut the trailers and TV spots for it and all of that, and it kept really, really busy. And in some ways it was kind of like, I think, maybe what it would have been like back in the old studio days when you were basically an on-staff. I was literally an on-staff editor, and for, I don't know, 5 years I worked steady without any breaks.
A new motion picture tells the incredible story of the most startling government cover-up ever conceived.
A lot of the editors did not get to stick around, but for some reason Sellier always kept me on, so it kept me really busy, and it was like a film school in a way, because you really learned how to do it and how to do it fast. It wasn't always the best stuff, obviously, and there were a lot of things I didn't like about stuff I had to work on, but and I liked living in Salt Lake, oddly enough, so it was a really good experience in that way. Hangar 18, I think, was in 1980, and post-production supervisor called me in the office one day, and he said, "We're going to do this big picture in Texas. It's going to be a sci-fi thing, and we want you to cut it, and we're going to cut it on location." We went to Midland, Texas, and I was down there for a couple of months, I guess. Probably the biggest picture I did, certainly the biggest picture up to that time that I'd done, and it's one of the biggest pictures I've done in my career, oddly enough. For the time, I think, I don't know what the exact budget was, but for the time it was a pretty sizable, I think it was probably the largest budget of anything that Sun Classics had done at that time. It was a lot of fun. We were in this little tiny town, Midland, Texas. They had found I think a decommissioned Air Force base there or something, and we used that, so we had cutting rooms there. I always loved going on location, and that was a great thing about film in those days. You load up a couple moviolas and go, Picture went on to, it was okay. Didn't get great reviews, but it was one of the first movies that I did. I think I actually got to go sit in the theater and watch later, which was fun. And it had kind of an interesting cast. I got to meet Robert Vaughn and some of those folks, and overall it was a pretty good experience. Chuck Sellier was basically the head of Sun Classic Pictures, although he did not own the company, but he was basically the guy that ran it. And it went through a couple of iterations. Some of the funding, I think, fell out. There was another company called Taft International, I think, that came after that. That was basically the same company. We had brown jackets then instead of orange jackets. We did a couple of pictures under that heading. And then eventually that came to an end, and Chuck kept downsizing the situation, and he had a company called Comworld that had some investors in it. Somebody told me that even Burt Reynolds may have been an investor in that company, and they did a couple of pictures. Then Comworld sort of became a acquisition company doing mostly just acquisition and distribution. That went on for a while. I think the last project that I'm not even sure it was a Comworld project, was Silent Night, Deadly Night. That may have been a Comworld project distributed by TriStar. And then after that, Chuck continued to do work. I did work for him even several years later that we did for CBS. I think we did a couple of Desperado series for them and other things. And I did stuff for him up until, I don't know, I think the last job I did for him was maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, a little independent feature called Friends for Life that he produced. It seemed like it just kept kind of closing down, getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because I don't think there was the kind of money and distribution possibilities. And the four-wall thing had gone away, which was what his, Sun Classics was really based on. So it just kept getting kind of smaller and smaller and smaller as time went by.